So first, falls are the second leading cause of unintentional injury deaths worldwide. First is road traffic injury, and that's from the World Health Organization. Second, now listen to this one carefully. This threw me for a doozy. If you're over 65, there's a 25% chance that you will fall. If you fall, studies show that your chance of falling again doubles. If you fall and break your hip, there is a 30 to 40% chance that you will die within a year. Not necessarily from the fall itself, but from complications from infection, from surgery, becoming immobile, depressed, etc. Anecdotally, I've seen this one happen, unfortunately, to many people
Yeah.
I
A lot of
know.
us have.
Yeah. So my question to you is, how can mobility help with all the above?
Sure. Well, the National Institute on Aging thinks that all this fall risk is happening for three big reasons. It's lack of strength, lack of balance, and lack of mobility. And I'll tell you that my husband and I have been going around the world for 20 years trying to preach the power of mobility. And I'll say it's difficult because it's always the first thing to get crossed off of your sort of health to-do list. And so we're trying to get out into the world and sort of preach the gospel of maintaining your mobility as you age so that you can maintain your independence. And one of the main things that I hope you go away with is, unlike your muscle mass and your bone density, your mobility does not actually have to go down as you age. Not only can you keep your full mobility as you age, but you can improve it if you've lost it. And so I think there's a lot to know there. One thing I want you all to know is, in cultures where people sleep on the ground, toilet on the ground, and eat on the ground, the fall risk in the elderly is near zero. So I am going to have Jason go through a way that you can test your mobility. He's really nervous. But what I hope that you take away today is my favorite mobility practice that everybody can do and everybody has time to do, which is spending 30 minutes a day sitting on the floor. And there's no magic way to do it. In fact, the best way to do it is to be constantly changing positions. Sit cross-legged, sit 90-90, long sit. I know you have time because the data shows that everybody's watching at least 3 hours a day of television. And so I layer in my floor sitting either when I'm working from home on my laptop or when I'm watching Netflix at night. Your hips and your low back will thank you. And it is one of the most powerful physical practices that I do is sitting on the floor.
So before we start demoing me, which I'm going to try to delay as much as possible, in terms of sitting in chairs, do you have best practices for sitting in chairs more generally?
I mean, I don't really have best practices for sitting in chairs. My advice is to try to sit as little as you can. I think we've all heard and know that sitting is not great for you. It's been compared to smoking in some instances. But for my part, the human body was not meant to have all of our joints at 90-degree angles all the time. And so that's the reason why we've all gotten so stiff and inflexible. And, one of the amazing things about this strength and conditioning boom, especially for women, is that if you're following a good strength and conditioning program, it also actually is doubling as a mobility program, because a good strength and conditioning program should account for moving your joints through every possible range of motion. You should be going overhead, squatting, hinging, pulling, pushing. If you're doing all of the moves in a quality strength and conditioning program, it's actually doubling as a mobility program. So it's another one of the 10,000 reasons why we all need to be lifting heavy weights and doing a real strength and conditioning program.
And so how do we assess our mobility today?
Okay, so poor Jason, you may have all seen this on the internet. There's a great test called the Sit and Rise test. It's based on a 2012 study that
We can turn the camera off.
The ability to get up and down off the ground is a significant predictor of overall health and mortality. And we also love it because it is the greatest and simplest way to get an insight into your own mobility. So I'm going to go ahead and put Jason through the test. If any of you want to do it as well, but nobody
Sure, everyone, jump in.
Nobody wants to sit on the ground, but you can go home and do this test in your living room. Have your kids do this test. It's a really important insight into where you are. So why don't you stand up? I'll show you how to do it.
Excellent.
Okay,
I'm good.
So you cross your legs. And you cross your foot over one foot over the other. And then with control, you lower yourself to the ground. He's probably going to lower himself to this little
So I'm
step
assuming
here.
I want to create some distance between the feet to get some more.
Yep. So it's just lower yourself with control
There you go.
to the ground, to an object, and then you're going to stand. I can't do it in these wedges I'm wearing. Otherwise, I would do it. And
yeah,
I'm
these
wearing a
sneakers
dress,
are very
so I don't want to
uncomfortable.
flash anybody.
It's the sneakers.
So
Don't buy these sneakers. You
can you
can't
get
do
all
it.
the way down without falling back?
I'm kind of going.
Yeah.
It just feels a little awkward.
You're like, all right, you're good. So the
Now I
idea
want to keep
is
going.
You lower yourself to the ground, and then you stand back up.
Oh,
Ideally,
but you got to leverage your
we're gonna
toes.
make
I'm figuring it out now.
See, that's a point right there.
Oh, okay.
You got it. There we go. All right, and now
I have a feeling I didn't pass.
With your
Do I have
legs
to get
still
up?
crossed, you have to stand back up.
Oh,
Ideally,
okay. Getting
without
up's
putting
easy.
a hand or a knee down.
That's
There we
easy.
go.
All right.
You can practice this test on your living room floor, and it's
I'm like, it's got to be harder when you're 6'7".
it's scored out of 10. Scored out of 10. You want to get better than an 8 out of 10, which means you can put one hand down and one knee down to get an 8 out of 10. And what I love about the sit and rise test is that if you follow my advice after this and take up the practice of sitting on the floor for 30 minutes a day, you're going to be practicing it at least once a day because you're going to need to get down to the floor and then back up again. So that's the way to get better at this test, is to practice the test by actually going up and down to the floor and then spending time sitting on the floor. It's this really amazing way to almost passively mobilize your hips, low back,
feel it in the hips.
and ankles.
So what was my score?
I mean, I think maybe you got like a 6.
A 6. I'm 6'7" though.
Yeah, you're
Like,
6.
It's got to
You
be
have
a little
a really
harder.
long way to go. You have a really long way to
Yeah.
go.
I'm like, okay.
Yeah, it's not fair to you. It's not fair to you.
There we go. We got that on tape. So what else? I think people have their routines every day. One of them is obviously try not to sit, try to move. What else can we do? Like the routines of our everyday life to incorporate like some mobility to get that movement going.
I'm sure you'll hear this theme a lot today, but I could not be more of a fan of walking. And my number is 8,000 steps a day because I read a study that said you have a 51% lower risk of mortality at 8,000 steps, and that goes up with more steps a day. But what I find for me as a busy working mom is that I can actually achieve 8,000 steps a day. And I can usually do that by just adding in some walking meetings during my workday, listening to a podcast while I walk my dog. I don't actually have to carve out a whole hour to get those steps in. So for me, walking is the best way to add additional movement and to combat the ill effects of sitting. The other thing that's great about walking is it's one of the ways you can practice hip extension, which is the opposite of what we're doing in chairs all the time, hip flexion. And what we notice and have noticed for years in our physical therapy clinic is so many people are missing critical hip extension, and that is often the cause of their low back pain. So walking and running is a great way to practice hip extension as well.
How do you dress up those walks?
So I'm a huge fan of rucking. I love carrying a heavy weight. The only thing I would say is there's a big trend in the internet now of women putting on weight vests. Although I see a lot of them are like 4 pounds. And I think that's a great starting weight. But I think if you are going to ruck, you want to try to actually get a meaningful load, which I think is probably more than about 4 pounds. So you want to try to work up to rucking. So I ruck. I've been doing it for a while and I worked up to it. I ruck with a 20-pound ruck. I also just like to break up my walk. I fast walk, I slow walk, I fast walk, I slow walk. I also don't find, I'm a fan of a breathing practice, but it's something I don't find I have time to do. So that's where I practice my breathing. So I will do some breath holds while I'm walking. I focus on nasal only breathing while I'm walking. So I just figure out ways to sort of stack behaviors into my walking that I don't have time to do, but I know I should.
Let's talk about that. You don't have time to do it, but you should. And one of the things, we immediately bonded with you and Kelly, your husband and wife, you work together, you've got 2 incredible girls who are athletes, you're rooted in science, and you don't have a lot of time.
Nope.
And unfortunately or fortunately, there's so much information out there on the internet. And in the biohacking longevity conversation, if you will, there are very intense protocols. And it starts one's morning and it's, a couple hours elapses and you haven't done anything yet. You got the sauna and the plunge and then the sunlight and then God knows what. And then next thing you know, your wife is filing for divorce. Well, no,
Yeah.
most of these people are married who have the protocols. That's another interesting theme, and probably never will be. But you and Kelly are so practical. And so talk about some of the practices you've incorporated in your day-to-day. These are some great examples of how you make it all work. Because you do a lot of these things that many of these people are leading the conversation doing, but you do it in a very practical way that doesn't derail your entire life.
Yeah, we have a concept called base camp, which is not dissimilar from Vonda's method. But for us, base camp is this idea that Kelly and I, my husband, were obsessed with all things like climbing Mount Everest, even though we have no desire to do it, but we were fascinated by it. We watch all these documentaries. And what we see in the longevity space in particular is that there are all these people who have skipped base camp. If you climb Everest, you have to wait at base camp for 6 weeks before you can climb. What we see in the longevity space is all these people are skipping acclimating at base camp, and they're trying to climb up the Khumbu Icefall. And what I mean by that is they're laying in red beds and they're sauning and they're cold plunging and they're throwing away their black appliances and they're doing all this stuff, which is all great, actually. I'm fine with all that stuff. But they skipped over the basics. And so our point of view is master the basics and then you sort of earn the right to play with all the gadgets. And for us, the basics are walking 8,000 steps a day, sitting on the ground for 30 minutes a day. I eat 800 grams of fruits and vegetables. I eat 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight. I strength train for 4 days a week, sometimes 5. And I try to sleep 8 hours a night. And that's it. Though for us, that's what we call base camp. And we just put that on repeat, on repeat, on repeat. And if we ever have to default, if we have to cut anything out, we cut out those extras. We cut out cold plunging, we cut out sauning, we cut out red light therapy. We cut out all the extras in favor of the basics, especially when we get really time crunched.
I like it. And it's like, that's like the frosting. You got to bake the cake.
You got to bake
put
the
on
cake
the frosting.
and to get the frosting, exactly.
I love it. So what's your daily non-negotiable? Like when you wake up in the morning, what do you do? How do you start your day?
Well, I'm a busy working mom, so one of my non-negotiables is coffee.
There you go.
But my next non-negotiable is getting steps, because I also travel a lot for work. So sometimes my opportunity to train is lost to me, but I can always walk. So when I have a day where my day is not my own, and between my work schedule and my kids' schedule, I'm not able to do all the practices, I always walk.
I love it. And what about the stairs?
I love stairs. We actually have a stair climber at our gym for rainy days. So I love the stairs.
Well, we love all of your work. Please check out everything Juliet does. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.